Addie had like a mental breakdown for about an hour and a half last night, from like 8 to 9:30.
It's like my daily life.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, kid, get used to it.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Welcome to adolescence.
Well, I guess when you're 8, you're not ready for that jump to adolescence yet. She did not want to give up any of her stuffed animals. She sleeps with like 13 animals in her bed. I'm like, you got to go down to 5, and that caused. That doesn't mean they're right.
I literally bought an octopus stuffed animal at the zoo like 2 weeks ago with my own money.
For 2 big lines were, you can't change me, and this is the way God made me.
Wait, what is she?
8.
I like her.
So, too bad.
That's great. That's really great.
Well, what you picked up so far? You had your final packet, at least quiz kind of packet, so yay for that. This one we're doing for Friday, all right? Oh, it's 20 pages.
The first one was
So you're talking about like a 3-page difference because this one ends on page 19.
so like this is like dense. Like this one literally took me an hour to read 16 pages. So
Friday.
wait,
I can't even read it. You have to read 3 things, and I think it's better season. I don't know.
3 things
3
must
things.
be read. Alright, so tomorrow you have your quiz for Birmingham Jail. I passed back your civil disobedience quizzes. Tomorrow's quiz and Friday's quiz will pretty much be similar setup, similar structure in the sense that both of them are going to be single sheets of paper. Now, yes, they will, or single sheets of paper. They will be double-sided. Tomorrow's quiz for a letter from Birmingham Jail, I believe, is 30 points, and then Wollstonecraft is 20. So they're all in that 20 to 30 range, at 25 to 30 to 20. The overall setup is pretty similar too, in the sense that you're going to have short answer questions. Yes, there'll be some fill in the blank for quote kind of thing. You can earn partial credit, like you did for these. Don't leave them blank, and that gives yourself a chance to earn some points. So Birmingham Jail's 30, and then Vindication is going to be 20. And again, for both of them, you can again bring in your notes. You can't use the packet, but any kind of notes that you can bring in, you certainly can use during the quiz. For Vindication of the Rights of Women, we'll go over some background with it on Wednesday. We'll go into Thursday if necessary. I'll kind of give you timeline events as to who she is and all that kind of stuff. It is a dense reading, as Lexi was talking about, and a lot of that has to do with the time period, 1792. Of the 3 documents that you're looking at, it's certainly the oldest one. So this is preceding civil disobedience by approximately 50-55 years. So she's very intelligent. She knows what she's writing about. She knows what she's discussing. Yeah, she does use some big words for it, partially because she needs to make sure that her audience takes her seriously with it. So it will take a little bit of effort on your part to read through it. I think us going over some things on Wednesday and Thursday will certainly help with it quite a bit. Historically, Wollstonecraft is usually regarded as like the first modern feminist. This is a chapter from a much lengthier work, so you see at the beginning, chapter 4. So we're looking at one chapter, not the whole entire work. She certainly recognizes that women don't have a whole lot of opportunity. She is British. She's from England, at time of publication. You see that she dies in 1797, so this is only 5 years before her death. Her daughter, from a literary standpoint, is probably more famous than she is. Her daughter is Mary Shelley, who was the author of Frankenstein in 1818 is when that novel gets published. So she's like the grandmother of Frankenstein's monster, if you want to look at it that way, I guess. Certainly she's going to have some issues with male viewpoint towards women. But her main complaint, at least within this chapter, it's not with males, it tends to be more so with females, especially those who have the ability to get educated or to be educated based on their financial standing, social standing, but choose not to. And so she looks at education as being the main way in which women can change their place within a male-dominated society in the late 1700s going into the early 19th century. So again, Wednesday we'll go over this stuff in a little bit more detail. I would recommend, certainly trying to begin a little bit earlier. I know tonight you're probably finishing up a letter from Birmingham Jail, hopefully finishing and not starting. But that'll be your focal point, and then you shift gears to this one going for Friday. So this will be the one for Friday. Next week is when you'll get your actual prompt that we're going to do with all of these sources, and I'll give you the rest of the sources. So that will be coming down the road. You'll have plenty of time to put those things together. We'll discuss it. You'll have more sources, but this is the last one of the larger ones, and the last one in which you get quiz. Wednesday, speaking of quiz, remember you got literary term quiz. You'll tend to grow fond of those because they should be point helpers, grade boosters. It's a matching quiz, so you'll have your 11 terms, 11 definitions. That's all you need to really worry about for that one. That'll be a quick quiz. We're talking like less than 5 minutes, and then we'll be able to move on to our other stuff. On your weekly syllabus, and I kind of separated them under the upcoming dates down at the bottom. There is a date change because we were talking about independent reading journals and all that stuff on Friday. You'll notice at the bottom, the essay is the same. The formal essay for the whole book is still that Tuesday the 29th. I switched the journals, 1 and 2, rather than being due on the 4th and the 11th, they're due on the 11th and the 18th. So Matt, you got 2 things to really worry about this week. You can put that novel there on the back burner a little bit. You do, that week of the 11th, that's the week that you don't have school on Monday and Tuesday. You have a 3-day week. So I'm not saying that that'll be your main homework assignment over that 4-day weekend, but that'll probably be your main homework assignment leading into that 4-day weekend before you submit those journals on the 11th and the 18th. All right. I'm moving them back. 1 minute. The final essay, that one did not change. That 29th, that's staying. That's not changing. But that gives you a little bit more time to kind of get stuff organized. I don't want people writing about Great Gatsby when they're doing a vindication quiz on Friday. That'd be confusing. All right.
Elena, do you still sleep with your stuffed animals?
No, he's sitting on the shelf.
Okay. It's not like I threw them away.
Wait, what did you do outside?
I told her that she had too many animals in her bed. She needed to pick 5 animals.
How many do you have?
There's like a dozen in there. She throws them all on the floor anyway. What's the point? Can't reason with that kid.
Why there's one not have them?
Why limit it down to 5? Because it'll grow exponentially. Like she'll have 75 animals in there at the end of the day. They all end up on the floor. She kicks her sheets off anyway. And there's really only one dumb bunny that she snuggles with. So why?
You know what I really hate this American? I hate my
Friday's running together for me. We didn't talk about this guy on Friday, did we?
We did.
Or we did?
Yeah.
Okay, yay. Jack, what do we say about this guy?
He is 1/8 African American.
But who is he? This is why we need to talk about it again.
Plus C. Yes.
All right, so we're going to do a quick little recap and then head into some new things with it. Jack, you were mentioning the whole concept about being 1/8 black, which remember that is totally non-scientific whatsoever. Homer Plessy, he's Creole. He's a French-speaking Creole, which that in Louisiana, New Orleans at the time in 1892 when he gets arrested for that train ticket, that kind of already puts him at a little bit of a disadvantage like traditional white American English-speaking society. But certainly, as we mentioned, if this guy walks into a train station and goes, I need a ticket to Chicago, what car do you want to ride on, sir? He'll be able to pick and choose wherever he wants to go so far as looks and whatnot. His upbringing is pretty, basic. There's nothing super special about him so far as being main activist or anything like that. Plus, he's a shoemaker by trade. Apparently, he's a pretty good shoemaker. So we can go back to Julius Caesar and do all our puns about souls and things like that. He could fix your soul, Kaylee. I mean, life would be a whole lot better, maybe. But 1892 is ultimately when he gets arrested, and in some ways his job was to buy a ticket, get on the train, get arrested, get booked. Those four things, those four tasks, if he accomplishes them, that's what the Citizens Committee wants him to do so he can get arrested. Jack, you remember the other end of the court case? Plessy versus? Okay. And that, of course, is 1896 when that trial takes place, going all the way to the Supreme Court. And that's where we get the phrase separate but equal. Which it doesn't take long to recognize separate, basically means unequal. You're not going to have any kind of equality taking place. People always ask, or a lot of people ask, who's Ferguson? It's not the guy who arrested him or anything like that. Ferguson is referencing to John Howard Ferguson, who is the initial judge who rules that he can be arrested, should be booked, can ride on a separate train car from New Orleans. So when this goes to Supreme Court case, it's basically Plessy versus the judge, and they uphold Ferguson's decision. So this deals with train cars, and of course the issue is once you have this whole idea of separate but equal, it can go from trains, from transportation, basically to whatever people want it to be. Restaurants, you get the same food, you pay the same price, you can be in separate areas. Hotels, you're staying in the same building, paying the same price, you can be in separate areas. Laundromats, water fountains, whatever the case may be, that certainly allows them for that separate but equal to take place. Now, it doesn't take long, again, as we mentioned, for us to realize that that equality doesn't really necessarily hold true, but in theory it is allowed. Or it's not that it's allowed, but in theory it would be in practice. That comes to change with this person. What'd you ask? Brown verse. That would be 1954. This is Thurgood Marshall, who is the lead attorney arguing for Brown versus Board of Education. And this is Topeka, Kansas Board of Education that is going against. Thurgood Marshall becomes the first African American to be justice on the Supreme Court until his death in, I forget the year, I think it was 1990s. I think I was in middle school when it happened. But this certainly rises him to preeminence and a whole lot of fame. The important thing about Brown versus Board of Education, there's a couple things. Number one, it overturns Plessy versus Ferguson. The justices realize that no, separate but equal certainly is not a true statement. It does not happen. You separate people, things are not the same. And certainly in this case, things are not fair. The other important thing to certainly take from it is this is dealing with education. So it overturns Plessy versus Plessy versus Ferguson, but this is only within the realm or the institution of education. It has absolutely nothing to do with any kind of other aspect of life. And letter from Birmingham Jail, we're dealing with business district, merchant district within Birmingham, where you are dealing with hotels, restaurants, cinemas, theaters, laundromats, those kinds of things. You're not dealing with education in school. The other thing is, it's not that, the drop of a hat, this, I think this occurs in May. It's not like the beginning of the next school year in 1955, all of a sudden all of the schools are desegregated. A lot of places, especially in the South, Arkansas, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, you have a lot of politicians where their case to be governor, mayor, and things like that are, I'm going to defy the United States government and the U.S. Supreme Court. So there is a lot of support going against Brown versus Board of Education. So even though it is deemed unconstitutional, that doesn't mean that you're going to have people changing all of a sudden when the viewpoints when it does come to desegregation. And one of the more famous instances where this occurs, where you do have this battle of what do we want as a school district of a local community versus the Supreme Court, takes place in, Jack, this is when you say something, I go, nice job. But he has nothing to say. And then Ray says something, and I go, nice job. But I don't think he has anything to say. And then Aiden raises her hand, but I don't call on her. Dealing with the Little Rock 9. Is that what you were going to say? I think you said Ruby, like Ruby Bridges. I think she's New Orleans, where that one occurs. Still same time. But similar idea where you have the desegregation of schools taking place. You have the Little Rock 9, and this is occurring in 1957. Jack, we had a quiz about this one year, and I asked who are the Little Rock 9, and a person wrote down minor league baseball team. I wish that was made up. It's kind of like the Foo Trace when we had on that multiple choice, you know. Kids say the darndest things. Little Rock, located what state? Arkansas. Good. Hey, we passed geography. Anybody familiar with Little Rock 9? Not a minor league baseball team. In Little Rock, Arkansas, Little Rock is similar to situations that are taking place, you know, in Birmingham, in Jackson, Mississippi. You do have a very racially divided environment where in 1957, Arkansas is basically going, and the United States government with pressures, okay, there needs to be more desegregation taking place within the schools. Supreme Court case was from 3 years ago. It's time to actually kind of get this into action. There is some concern, certainly by whites at the time, about desegregating, and there's also concerns from the African American community about desegregating, because the last thing that people want to deal with are going to be folks yelling at them, taunting them. There could be physical altercations. Nobody likes to feel as if you're going into an unsafe environment, mass scale, and we're trying to avoid as much conflict as possible. So the African American leaders of Little Rock decide, okay, we're going to bring in, not saying our 9 best students, but 9 people who we feel have the best chance of assimilating well into a predominantly white school, and therefore can kind of start to be the trailblazers for everything else that's going to come through. So you have people who are academically are very strong. The idea that you have, you know, thick skin, that you're going to be able to withhold a lot of taunting, because you're certainly not going to get welcomed with open arms, as we can see up here at the top. And some people who are going to be able to handle the pressure, which is a tall task to take. 9 students are coming into school. Certainly you can notice on the first day of school, not everybody is happy by what they are seeing. And also, what do we notice over here? You put a little circle and people get excited. Who has a pretty strong presence there? There's a military presence, and the reason for this is the governor of Arkansas is a guy by the name of Orville Faubus. He calls in the National Guard of Arkansas to prevent the students from entering. So the Arkansas National Guard, you're coming into school, no, you cannot enter. None shall pass. Number one, you're probably already concerned about what's going to possibly be taking place, what you're going to have to deal with, let alone the whole racial situations. You kind of remember what first days of school are, going to new buildings, not knowing anybody, or at least very few people. Now you throw on the racial tension that's taking place, and now you throw in a military presence. President at the time, anyone recall, 1950s, former World War II General Dwight D. Eisenhower. Jack's starting to redeem himself. Eisenhower goes, you can't do this. So Eisenhower calls in the 101st Airborne Division, if I can spell, to have the National Guard stand down. So first day, this isn't going well. National Guard shows up, and Faubus calls them in before the first day of school, so they know they're going to be there. So Eisenhower's kind of trying to do this then to kind of calm those folks down. But imagine, you got military presence representing the state. You also have a military presence representing the nation and the president going, you can't enter, you must enter, you can't enter, you must enter. So this is really making it up to be a very, very difficult situation. So certainly tensions are running very, very high at this point. The students do get into school. They have basically escorts from the 101st Airborne Division going throughout the day. So, Matt's sitting in school, and next to him could be, lieutenant, sergeant, or whatnot, to make sure as little as possible happens. You can have a physical presence there, but that doesn't mean there's not going to be verbal taunting taking place. And that also doesn't mean there's not places that you can go. You have females who are going to be going to the restroom, they're going in there by themselves, and that's certainly where some episodes of problems can take place. Of the 9 students who initially desegregate the school, only 1 graduates. Some students decide, nope, not for me. I don't want to deal with this anymore. You have some students, I believe it's 2, who are expelled from school for various things. One person in the cafeteria, they're really certainly dealing with verbal taunting. People are throwing food. She takes her chili and dumps it on a person's head, who's kind of spearheading the movement. We all clap. She gets expelled from school for it. So there are, a whole bunch of reasons as to why this becomes difficult. In addition to it, you also have times when, and they wouldn't do this for like the whole entire school year necessarily or a month at a time, but rather than educate everybody, white and black, Little Rock school system will do periodic shutdowns where they'll just cancel school throughout the course of the year. You might have school Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, no school, we're closed. Come back tomorrow. Maybe there'll be school on Friday, maybe not. Then you go back to school again for a couple of weeks, maybe then there'll be a 3-day interruption. Nope, no school, we're not going to have that. And it does a couple things. Number one, the students who are coming in to desegregate, not necessarily always, same amount of distance as the white students, so it's a little bit of a longer trip, and it can be more difficult in a lot of ways to get there. You finally get there, and then you see the closed for business sign. It also is going to upset who else? Not just the black students, but it's also going to upset possibly white students or white community members' parents. Who are they already upset with? They're already upset with the desegregation, the black students who are there. Now what happens? What's going to be the viewpoint? Hey, our school is closed. They didn't like that one nearly as much as the circle. Our school is closed and it's your fault. So now blame is also, or pressure is now also coming from white community onto the African American community, those who are desegregating, that you're causing our school system to shut down and our kids aren't getting the education that they deserve. So you have these shutdowns that are taking place, and then you also have other schools begin to mimic this policy. Certainly this is national news, and it's not something that is just a problem in the South, because we do view a lot of, I think, the racism, discrimination, segregation as being a Southern problem, but you have a majority of schools are going to be segregated, whether you're east, west, north, south. throughout the United States at this point. So this is not a situation that is just in the South. Pittsburgh has issues with this. Boston has serious issues with this throughout the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and even up into the 80s. With the current, Pittsburgh public school system, you'll always hear cries about maybe things do need to be desegregated a little bit more because Pittsburgh public, I don't know what the number of high schools is now. When I went there, I think we had 11. But they're basically community schools. So if you have a high school in a white community, a high school in a black community, your population demographics tend to be predominantly white, be predominantly black, be predominantly wealthy, be predominantly poor. So there still are some cases where people will argue segregation is taking place. This is an issue, but I think a lot of folks tend to look at it as being more of a nuisance than anything else. That kind of starts to change, though, when his situation comes to light a little bit more. Anybody know? Emmett Till. I think Mr. Deweese used to do a lesson on him. I don't know if he still does or not. Jack's giving me the no. You're like the moral conscience of the class, the voice, I guess. Emmett Till's born in 1941, and he is murdered in 1955. So you can certainly tell at a very young age, 14 years old. Emmett Till is from Chicago. But he has relatives that live in Mississippi. And so in the summer, he would usually make a trip down to Mississippi for about a month or so and stay with relatives. Has aunt, uncle, cousins that he will stay with down there over the summer. In the summer of 1955, goes to Mississippi. They're I think it's like 14 miles north of Jackson, Mississippi, capital of Mississippi. Him and the cousin go to like the general store, I guess, the giant eagle shop, say Coon's Market of the day. And allegedly he whistles to a white woman. I don't know if that's ever been confirmed that it did happen, did not happen, whatnot, but that's certainly the accusation that she makes towards him. Him and his cousin leave the store, and then they are abducted by, or at least Emmett Till is abducted by the wife's husband, who was not there when it happened, so she tells him about it, and then her brother-in-law. The two of them abduct Emmett Till and then basically torture him, which results in his death. He's pistol whipped with a handgun. He is ultimately shot. After, at least we think it's after he's shot, his ear gets cut off, the eye is gouged. They take a fan from machinery, barbed wire, tie it around his neck, throw the body in the Tallahatchie River. It takes about 3 days, I believe, for the body to resurface, so he's missing, and then authorities find the body, and then the two men are put on trial. You want to take a guess at the demographic of the jury? 12 white men. They deliberate for 67 minutes, so just over an hour, and then find the two defendants not guilty. After the trial, not like as they are walking out, but within the following week, the husband does admit to the murder. Yes, we did. But U.S. court system with double jeopardy, you can't try someone for the same crime twice. So the charges are investigated multiple times, and I don't think it's until like 2005, I think that the case is officially closed, but the two men are never retried for the murder. It's certainly big news in Mississippi. The initial case itself, I wouldn't say is front page news in New York or Pittsburgh or any places like that, north of the Mason-Dixon line. But when his funeral takes place in Chicago, that is when this blows up from a news media standpoint. Jet Magazine is one of the main magazines of the day. It's a news magazine, it's kind of like a cross between Time Magazine and like People Magazine, Entertainment Weekly. You have some pop culture stuff, you also have some news things going on. They send reporters, photographers to the funeral in Chicago, and Emmett Till's mother has the casket open. It's meant to be a closed casket viewing and funeral. She opens the casket, and then they start taking pictures. So you see what the shape that his body is in, and it looks absolutely nothing like the face that is out there. So that becomes the front page magazine cover news story, and now you have people in Pittsburgh So obviously Chicago, where he's from, Los Angeles, Boston, New York, are now coming in an uproar because certainly you're dealing with the death of a young person, and now you have a face to look at, and now you also have kind of like an after photo to look at and realize what is going on. So certainly Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Ruby Bridges, those are all big people that are certainly getting people involved with the desegregation, racism, discrimination. But much like the way in today's where you have camera, cell phone footage taking place, of police brutality or some kind of issues, this involvement of mass media gets a lot of America involved and concerned about what's going on, which sets the stage for where we are, Birmingham, 1963. This is referred to as, and now we're dealing with letter from Birmingham jail, the Birmingham Campaign. Birmingham Campaign, the whole hope is to desegregate the business district. So we mentioned Brown versus Board of Education, you're dealing with public schools being desegregated. Now we're getting involved into restaurants, hotels, cinemas, those kinds of things. Martin Luther King, his home base is Atlanta, Georgia, and his coalition comes down to Birmingham to advocate for the desegregation. Going to Birmingham is like going into the fire. I mean, Birmingham is one of the most, if not the most, racially divided city in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. Willie Mays, this famous baseball player, played for the New York Giants and San Francisco Giants, African-American baseball player. His team wins the World Series in 1954, and people want to have a parade for him in Birmingham, and is not going to take place because of still all the racial divide that would be taking place, even though folks look at him as being a great American sports hero. So certainly King is coming down, and King has a pretty good idea that he's probably going to run into some opposition from a legal standpoint, from a police standpoint. The main way that they are going about their protests are going to be what kind of manner? Non-violent. Taking in his inner Henry David Thoreau. So you have sit-ins, taking place at restaurants. You'll have kneel-ins, knell-ins, taking place at churches, and then you'll also have what other kind of demonstrations along the streets? Yeah, parades, peaceful protests. And you can have parades and peaceful protests because of what right? You got your First Amendment right, freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of religion, freedom to protest. Birmingham sets up city ordinances where you will be denied to protest, which is obviously unconstitutional. So King is aware of this, and on April the 12th, they stage a large rally protest. So April the 12th, 1963, is when King and about 50 others are arrested. It's actually Good Friday of 1963, so you have religious leader kind of making the sacrifice, playing with, not playing, but certainly utilizing on the church calendar an important date. So he's arrested on April the 12th on a Friday. At the top of your letter, you will see that it is written on April the 16th, 1963, and he writes it while he's in solitary confinement on scraps of paper that he's able to get access to. He gives the pieces of paper, the scraps, then to his lawyers, and then the lawyers' secretaries are able to kind of put together the letter and then have it published. One of the things you should take note of at the top of the letter, it does say, "Dear fellow clergymen." He is writing it to the clergy of Birmingham because the clergy of Birmingham have put a letter in the paper before his arrest saying the King and the others should leave because you are causing a lot of civil unrest, dangers of violence that could possibly take place in Birmingham. So certainly, he has a strong argument taking place from an illogical, emotional standpoint about discrimination, segregation. But there's a heavy religious allusion tone that you might take note of while you're reading it, and that's going to make sense because he is writing to fellow clergymen. Ultimately, John F. Kennedy is president at the time and orders that King be released from prison. And so he, along with some others, and so he is released on the 19th. So he's in prison for a week. During this time, after he gets arrested, and it's the 13th time, I think, that King is arrested in his life, so this is not, anything new for him, all for, like, similar, reasons. They do more and more demonstrations, more and more parades, and this is where you start to see the more famous pictures where firefighters, police officers are using hoses, dogs, things like that to keep people, try to keep people in order or fearful of what's going on. Eventually, over 1,000 people are arrested in Birmingham during the course of this week. So that causes havoc on the jail system because they cannot hold this amount of people. They cannot function. It takes like 5 or 6 hours for breakfast merely to get served to everyone. So part of, after he gets arrested, part of the campaign is if they're going to arrest us, then make them arrest all of us to put some pressure onto the fact that you cannot have this take place. So this rages on for roughly about a month, and then on May 10th, 1963, you have city ordinances going through that do desegregate Birmingham. About a month later, on June 19th, 1963, Kennedy submits his Civil Rights Bill that does ultimately get passed in 1965. This is after his death, his assassination that takes place. So Lyndon B. Johnson is actually president at the time. Also in this time in 1963 is when you have the desegregation of the University of Alabama. Those of you who have seen Forrest Gump, there's a scene where a young woman is going into Alabama desegregating. She drops her notebook and Forrest Gump picks it up and hands it to her. That's that desegregation that's taking place. You have a lot of politicians, and Alabama is very famous for it, with Governor George Wallace, who are advocating that they will continue to fight against the U.S. government in order to maintain segregation. But as all these laws start to go through, it begins to outlaw, obviously, discrimination, segregation, things like that. You do still have a lot of rough issues taking place. May 10th is when you have the desegregation of Birmingham. May 11th, the following day, is when the string of church bombings start in Birmingham that's orchestrated by the KKK. So it's not necessarily a happy ending that everything gets fixed up in 1963, but certainly over the next couple of years, decades, and it's taking time, you have that progress that is occurring. But when King is writing this, he is in jail. He's been in jail for about 4 or 5 days. He's going to remain there for a week. Keep in mind, he's writing to clergy, so that's going to be kind of part of what's his purpose, what's his audience with the occasion with the letter. That's going to kind of fuel a lot of the ideas and illusions that he's going to be making throughout. So tomorrow you got your quiz, letter from Birmingham jail. Notes, just like we did last time, by all means you can go ahead and use. We'll talk about it a little bit, hopefully, when you're done with the quiz. And then on Wednesday is when we'll take a look at Mary Walton's craft for the last packet after you do your first literary quiz. You get 11 out of 11 and feel happy, proud. And you want a full star in it. And then you'll sleep with your stuffed animals at home. Patty will still knock out. Go in the carpet. Lynn by Lynn.
Right.